Southwest Fire Academy was established in 2015 as a response to the recognized need for quality, safe, and affordable fire and rescue training in Ontario. This is not your average fire college. SFA has high standards for their students, and it is their mission to teach and produce qualified, ambitious firefighters who are prepared to work hard to serve their communities. This is not a diploma mill. This is where you can learn strategic, aggressive firefighting from passionate, intelligent instructors who never forget why they were made to do this job. SFA is an accredited private career college that is regulated by the Ministry of Training, colleges, and universities, with a memorandum of understanding with the Office of the Fire Marshal. This means that SFA is an approved training provider with the OFM, and the programs are recognized in Ontario. Check out their pre-service and expanding selection of course offerings at southwestfireacademy.ca. Hello everyone. Welcome to episode 129 of Multiple Calls. I'm Scott Hewlett. To be loved and valued not despite our humanity, but because of it, is one of the greatest gifts of this life. To love as many people as we can in this way is our purpose. Here's my chat with Eileen Bellew. What makes it especially moving is that you don't begin with John's death, you begin with his life. He's not presented only as a fallen firefighter, but as a husband, a dad, a son, brother, friend, and a man who found meaning in the fire service. So before we talk about Black Sunday, I'd love for people to know John. So who was he at home and away from the job and away from the uniform? Why don't we start there?
I think part of why I wrote this, not part, is that for the 20 years after John jumped, I was so young, so I was 35. I didn't know what to do with the attention, the media attention. So then I stopped speaking to media or whatever. I also was probably too young to be able to express it the way that I wanted it to. Knowing that, I kind of just shut down. Me being able to write the book and write down what I really felt and reflect on it for the last 20 years, that was so meaningful to me. The main reason I began to write it was that my daughter wrote the screenplay for Black Sunday. So she went to NYU, and at the time she was 2 years old when John died. So I had a 5-month-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So Katreana was 2, and then when she went to NYU, she wanted to do screenwriting, and she wanted to write her father's Black Sunday movie. So she interviewed me. And when she was interviewing me, I was very surprised at how much she didn't know, being that it was her life. I almost was asking her, you don't know the answers to this? And I came to realize as a mom, you're spending your life protecting them. You're protecting them from obviously all the outside sources that are around them, but I was protecting them from John's story because it's so traumatic and so sad. And I did not want them to know all of it. So I gave them age appropriate information. As the years went on, you don't sit back down and revisit it. After 5 years, you're not saying, okay, so now you're 11. Let's discuss the horrific events that day. You just don't do it. Did they know about it? Yes. Because we had 2 different trials. We had a criminal trial and a civil trial that dealt with Black Sunday. They did seep in information that they eventually, I don't know if they had the full picture. So I started writing down, not for it to become a book, but for it to become their history. So that I started writing down about the funeral, the day it happened, how I had to tell them, the actual funeral, the weeks after it. A majority of the book is the first 2 years. And then it goes into growth and understanding and things that we learned from our tragedy. I thought it was important for them to have that piece of information. And for when I'm long gone too. So I'll be gone someday from this earth and their children will need to know something about John. What makes me so sad is that my kids didn't get to experience this wonderful man. The other thing about dying in the line of duty, you're so shocked. The ceremonial unit comes in. they take over. So you say, great, but then it becomes a fireman's death as opposed to a person's death. You don't realize it until years after. Do you know, like you're almost grieving the process of grief. Like, I am so thankful for the FDNY. I am so thankful that they took over. At 35 years old, you don't have a plot. You don't have anything figured out. We didn't even have a will. You figure you're going to have that conversation. But I got very defensive sort of when it came to us burying John as just a fireman and not a father, not a husband, not a friend, not a brother, not a son. And he was all of those things. And we tend to forget that. And we just make him a hero. Now, early on, I knew that I was not presenting him only as a hero because I was left doing all the disciplining, and their father is left as this like hero, which he completely was. But he also had faults like we all do. I have plenty of them. And I did make sure that I told my kids little faults that he had. But he also was an extremely amazing father that they missed out on. They got to experience some of it. So I was a teacher. He was a fireman. We were able to work. He did his mutual 24s, and we were able to work so that we had minimum babysitters. Now, the babysitter we had was my mom. So, I mean, perfect, right? A typical weekend could mean that he goes in for the night shift on Friday. He works a 24, comes home Saturday night, goes back in Sunday morning, does a 24, and then he can be home with the kids while I'm at work Monday through Friday. So he did all the co-op preschools, you know, where he did it with the other, a lot of times other moms, but we're a very big fire police town. So there was often a lot of firemen who also did them. He brought them to all of their library programs. He brought them to all of their sports things. It was better for me because I didn't feel as guilty, like me being a teacher. But that was what we signed on for. That was how our lives were going. That was how we were going to pay for college, where two different salaries were being brought into our house. To give a little bit of background, when I met him, he worked on Wall Street. So he worked at Brown Brothers. I thought I was getting into a relationship with a guy in finance. As we progressed our relationship, he was called by the FDNY, and I thought, oh, you're going to deny it. Like, you're going to say no. Like, isn't that obvious? And eventually I realized it wasn't obvious. It's more of a calling versus something that you do. And I did see a shift and a change in his personality as going into Wall Street versus going into the firehouse was a very different. Like, I think he ran to the firehouse and away from our crazy house at times, and instead of being dragged into Wall Street. But prior to that, he went to Manhattan College. He went for 4 years. He swam for 4 years. He was a lifeguard at Rockaway Beach in Queens. He loved sports. His only flaw is he's a Yankee fan and I'm a Met fan. But, you know, we do look past some flaws, but...
The title After John Jumped is very direct and painful. And you explain in the book that you needed that language because it marks the dividing line in your life. So can you talk to me about why those words matter?
The first time I wrote, I was writing it, and then I was like, so after John jumped, and I was like, that's it. It's not when John passed away. It's not when John died. That's not the language that changed my life. Changed my life that created this PTSD and anxiety and my whole existence after was the fact, and it's still the fact, that John had to make this decision, that John was on fire on a fourth story, and he had to make the decision to jump or burn to death. There's not a day I don't think about it. There's not a day I don't think about him making that decision. Now, my hope is that John's soul left as he left the window. Mm-hmm. He jumped at 8:30 a.m. and he died around 1 p.m. So his body was still on earth, but I am hoping his soul left at 8:30. That's my only thing that gets me through a day is to think that there's nothing else that it can be. It cannot be anything different than that, because we think about people who are mass murderers who die a much easier death than what John experienced. So that is my dividing line in my life. So much of it is before John jumped, I was a completely different person, carefree. I had some anxiety, like everybody. So I won't say I didn't have any anxiety, but I had some trauma that was dealt with prior to John jumping. And then I became a completely different person, but more importantly, and sadder to me, is a different mom. So the mom that the kids had before John jumped was a broken mom after John jumped. So now they did not just lose John, they lost their mom, and they were left with a broken mom. Now, I still got up every day and I still took care of them, though very numb at many parts of my life. But I often think of, what would their lives have been if they had a carefree mom, if we had this like different household. And it's not even so much me, it's the household was sad. And kids feel this sadness and that almost like osmosis of feeling that reflected in my upbringing of them and probably reflected in their own like vicarious anxiety that I placed upon them. So that's why at first when I wrote After John Jumped, my kids were like, well, that sounds like he committed suicide. But I mean, quickly you realize that that's not where the book is going, but it is my dividing line. It's much more than just a space and time.
You push back against the idea that they were young and they won't remember. So what do you want people to understand about childhood grief?
Childhood grief, we know now, or people know that it is a rolling hill. So when I did have to go and tell them about their father's death, it appears like at different stages. So I told them individually because I knew that my 6-year-old it's a very different thing. And I did tell my 5-month-old, even though my 5-month-old was 5 months. But I felt I had to tell each one. And again, they visit it and then they go leave, and they visit it and they leave. And it's almost like a lifetime sentence versus me being in extreme grief and extreme anxiety for 2 years. And I'm not saying my anxiety went away because it hasn't, but there's a little bit of a lift as years go on, but they still experience it. So a perfect example I just shared with you, my daughter got engaged Friday. And you think it's the happiest thing. And it is so happy. But in the back of my mind, I'm always thinking, this would be so great to come home and say, like, we did it. Like, we brought this little girl into the world together, And now we're going to be shipping her to like her husband. And yes, that's so happy. But I don't get to do that. And she doesn't get her father to walk her down the aisle. I try to explain to people that from an outside point of view, it looks like my kids are fabulous, but their losses are continuous. And they are the strongest people I know, a lot stronger than myself. But they had to go through their whole entire school year with just one person in the audience. And sometimes not, depending on the flexibility. I couldn't always be in the stands because somebody else was pitching in the other thing. And then I had to run, and then I had to go to the next thing. And I ended up missing everything, So I couldn't be everywhere. And I was lucky that my kids were very involved in a lot of things, but I talk about relying on other people, and we had to. So I went from me, John, my mom, only people watching, to now relying on some babysitters, relying on my kids' friends, like to take them places, because I couldn't, because I was doing something with others. But I tell like the story, and I think this sums it up the best. When Kieran, who was my 5-month-old, went to kindergarten screening, and they asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. He was 4 years old. And he said, I want to be Santa Claus. And they said, "Oh, that's so sweet. Is that because he gives out presents to all the good little boys and good little girls?" And he said, "No, it's because he never dies." And that sums it up. They got what most kids don't get until later in life. But later in life, like a grandparent who was not supposed to die, but you know what I'm saying, would be a typical end of life, or say a pet. No, my kids, their bubble bursted when they were 6, 3, 2, and 5 months old. And that bubble never comes back, because the reality is bad things happen. They learned it very quick, very fast. And their mother didn't really help much, with the anxiety that I placed on them. So when people say, "Oh, it was good that they were young," it drives me nuts. Good. Why? Good. Why? Because they lost him. And then they lost so much more about him. They lost all of his knowledge, all of his advice, all of everything that I don't even remember. Do you know what I mean? It's not as if I had all of his back knowledge for when my kids were going to be teenagers. You're not writing all this stuff down or interviewing your person before, if whatever comes up, comes up. So that's where they've lost. Even as the boys get older, you see the loss greater, because they're now men who no longer had their dad that they could confide in things that I have no knowledge of.
And even if you did, I guess it's not delivered from him in the way that he would deliver it.
Correct.
Right.
And you can always say, you just never know. You just never know. But we will really never know. I never know if I made all the right decisions. All my decisions are still based on, what do I think John would do? We were aligned morally, obviously, for many different things, but there were plenty of different topics that were not even in the realm of discussion yet. So I don't know if I made all the right decisions. I always say, when I get to heaven, he's going to have this long list of things that I did wrong, that we're going to battle it out.
or just really appreciate that you did the best you could in a terrible situation.
Thank you. I like that.
Speaking a bit more about their grief, as they got older, did it change in any ways that really surprised you?
What surprised me is, as they're able to verbalize it themselves, you don't think you're putting your anxiety onto your kids. You try not to. Now, as they're older, they're verbalizing how much that did affect them. The one beautiful thing, the many beautiful things about my children, but one very beautiful thing is they spent their whole life making sure that I did not feel pain. And that is a wonderful gift from your children, but they are so concerned about me not hurting. So they would try not to do anything wrong. Now, they all did wrong things, like they did. I have one daughter that will tell you that she was actually perfect, but I was blessed with that. That's beautiful, because the empathy they had for their mom is they didn't want to see me in pain. That did not mean that I didn't walk around crying, because I did for a very, very long period of time. And then what I would see is that they would just go on with their, they knew it was a regular occurrence. So they just coped with it and just moved on and would continue to do whatever they had to do. You think that you're trying your best. And I then realized that as I placed this anxiety onto them, they now have this big weight in their chest. And now they have to learn how to deal with it. I'm open to sharing in the book that I have been in therapy since the second week after John jumped, and was open to bringing my kids to therapy. Very, very difficult to find pediatric therapist, I found it to be very, very difficult. Again, this was 20 years ago. I'm hoping that field has changed. They definitely needed guidance and help, and I was not the person for them to get that. because I was probably half their problems, as a lot of people blame their parents, but I was probably well-deserved in a lot of that situation.
When did you realize that what you were dealing with wasn't just sadness, but trauma living in your body?
I knew that my brain was like on speed all the time. I knew that I couldn't settle it down. So I knew that I needed help for that part of it. But I think that the one thing when I was speaking to my therapist, and the one time she said to me, did you ever think that your greatest fear is your biggest fantasy? And that blew me away. And first I became very defensive. What, are you kidding me? How could that be? My biggest fear is my fantasy. But as you really start to think about that, I got it. My fear was losing them. My anxiety is all surrounded by my kids, and it's all surrounded by their safety. Because John was taken away from me in such a sudden, quick, horrific way, it could happen again. It has been proven. It can happen to anybody again. I don't want to be surprised. So I think of all of the things that could happen to the kids. And then I go and I tell them, be mindful, like there's going to be men standing behind you when you're waiting for the subway, and they're going to push you onto the tracks. And then I come up with every scenario possible to warn them. And as a mom, you're thinking, that's a great thing. You're being protective. You are a mom. You should be doing that. To an extent, yes. To the extent where it was making me physically ill and not helping me sleep. After John jumped, I have never slept through the night since. I have a very difficult time falling asleep because that's when my brain really starts to go. And I could put myself into a panic attack at any time. I've gotten much better at flipping the switch to turn it off, but sometimes it's too late and the switch is already flipped. So after John jumped, I continued to breastfeed. After I finished breastfeeding him, like a year old, was when my therapist said, you have to try medication. You have to. And I fought that so hard because I was not the person who needed medication at 35. And no offense, I've nothing against anyone who needs medication. But at 35, I was like, but I'm not. I don't need it. Until she explained to me, chemically, you are a different person. You are not the same person at 35 as you were. You are a totally chemically different person that might need help. When I went on it, it helped tremendously. But again, I thought originally, before I was fighting it, that it was going to be like I was going to be loopy. I was not going to have a logical thought. I was going to be like, ooh. It had absolutely nothing like that. Zero effect about that, like loopiness. It was more, I was able to handle my life, like not scream at the kids because they got in my way. It was just regular life was happening, and I was in that world again, as opposed to being outside that world and everything going on around me.
Was it as if you didn't realize your baseline was, say, a 6 or a 7, then if something happened, you pin to a 10, whereas that it brings the baseline down, so then if something happens, you're not always pinning to a 10?
Yes, it didn't have me jump like so extreme. It took a couple of weeks for the medicine to settle into my system. And I remember so many mornings, so the kids would get up at like 6:30, 7 a.m. So many mornings, I look at the clock and like 9 a.m., I'm like, oh, God, we're not almost ready for bed. Like I was like, oh. And then I remember it was like 11, and I'm like looking at the clock for it to be ready for bed. And I was like, oh my God, it's 11. Like I've really made it from added 2 hours to my life where I wasn't like ready for it to be over, and slowly that got longer and longer.
You write a lot about toxic positivity and people saying things like everything happens for a reason. So what should people say instead when someone's in deep grief?
I think I just want you to sit in it. I just want you to acknowledge it. What I have discovered over the last 20 years is that nobody wants anyone to be sad. And they allow you in the beginning, there's like always a timeline. And some people allow you to be in grief for 2 weeks, some 3 months, some a year. And it's very common to hear there's no timeline for grief. And I completely agree with that. But to not acknowledge it is more painful. So when you are just saying, things happen for a reason, no, you can't explain John having to jump to his death. Like you can't. There's no reason for that. Or the kids are turning out the way that they're turning out because of all the, Agree. There are some positive attributes that happen along the way of struggle and grief, but I take the other path much more than how I'm ending up. So I just think that if you sit in it, and I have found this, like, I do it with my own kids, is they're sad, I want them to be better. I'll be like, oh, that's okay, but we can do this. Like, sometimes you can't fix it. You can't bring John back, and you can't fix the mess that I'm in. So I'd rather you just be with me and sit in the muck of it and be okay with being uncomfortable, because I'm uncomfortable. But I get it, because I do it the same thing. People don't want people to be sad, which is very nice, obviously, but sometimes we just have to be sad.
Because sometimes things are just awful.
Yeah, and that's fine. Unfortunately, ours lasted for many, many years of it awful, and that's what people can't handle.
Right. Have you ever felt like you had to be responsible for metering out that needing support from others or managing other people, because this is something that doesn't end? And like you're saying, people don't like the fact that it's hard for people to sit in something even though you have to sit in it for that long. And I just feel that way about some hard things in my life that have gone on a long, long time, that you feel like you can't, with all your friends, just have that on them all the time as well. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say. And the other thing that I would say for people who are going through it, like, or people who are trying to support somebody who is going through it, just because you are going, let me put it on to someone else. So say it happened. Just because that person is going through, there's no common ground with someone else in their family or another family member. So everyone has their own niche of grief. But just because you're grieving the same person, it doesn't mean that you can help each other, because it's a very different type of grief. Never mind that, but you don't have the energy. You don't have the knowledge. Like, again, just because you went through this, like, one, you're not all of a sudden given knowledge, but two, you are just surviving your own particular survival mode. I don't know why you're expected to give comfort and help to someone else when you are sinking. From an outside perspective, if you want to help someone, help the other people surrounding that. You can't, like, give support, because the other people might be looking for you to give support, and you are in no position to be giving support. Like, I felt like that with mine. Of course, I'm giving support to 4 kids. Like, that's my job. I signed on. There's no turning back on that. And myself. And that should be the only people that I should be responsible for at all. And everybody else who is in that same situation.
The fire service family shows up in powerful ways in your story, but you also write about moments where the system failed you. So how do you hold both of those truths at the same time?
For a long time, there was so much anger towards part of the fire service in the way that I was notified, or I should say lack of being notified. The anger helped a lot because it's easier to be angry than to be sympathetic to a system that wasn't working. Much later on, they came to me to explain that they made improvements on the system. My hope is that they continue to update that, because with social media today, I would never want someone to find out. I was like lucky in the sense that 20 years ago, there's not like an Instagram that's stating names and things like that. I would hope that that part will always be changed. The part that I still have tremendous anger for is the whole concept that in John's case, they took away ropes. It just ended up being a financial decision. And that is a difficult one to get over because it's clear cut. It's John had a shot if your financial decision wasn't based on saving money. So that's a tough one. That's a upper brass kind of a decision making. Now, when it comes to firefighters, they're still the greatest people in the whole entire world. Like the FDNY is still the greatest people in the whole entire world. John's firehouse is still John's firehouse, though it changes because you're no longer part of that firehouse. You're the widow of that firehouse. They don't make that decision. It's like it's an innate kind of thing that happens. They're not doing it to be mean or anything like that. It just happens that way. So you go from knowing everything that goes on in that firehouse to knowing nothing that goes on in that firehouse. And that is very sad too, because the loss of a firehouse, so many funny things happen in that firehouse, like that happened that John would come home and tell me and we'd be laughing at it. Now I've lost all that. All the stories, I lost all the families. Now, if I call up, they would be at my doorstep, but I didn't do that. I shouldn't even say that, because we had like a 5K run and they showed up every year. They did that. So I'm making it sound like I never asked them. I asked them to do that, and they did that, and they're fabulous, but it's a different type of relationship. And as you know, it's been 20 years. There's very few that are actually left from that day. It's another piece to why I felt I had to write this, because one of the very tough things that I had to do was in a criminal case in the Bronx in New York, it takes 4 years for your criminal trial to come up. So I had to wait 4 years for John's trial to come up. Now, it was 4 people were on in the criminal trial that were being held accountable for John's death and Kurt Myron's death. He was the covering officer that day. When I sat in that room, again, 6 people jumped. So 4 people were on the stand and 4 people got to tell their story. There was only 2 people that didn't get to tell their story. And I sat in that courtroom every single day, and it burned me up to not be able to scream out and yell and say, like, what about John? And the lawyers kept saying, well, we don't have to tell John's story because we have the other 4 to tell the story. But you didn't tell the jury that John broke every single rib in his body, and that he broke and shattered his femur, and that he burned his fit. Like, this book let me finally tell John's story to the world. And the sick part of this whole thing is that we didn't see any justice, like real true justice happen. But I never got to have like that impact statement like you see on TV and stand up and explain the beauty of John's soul and the beauty of him as a person and as a father and as a brother and as a son. And no, it was just John Bellew died. And then and I'm screaming in my head in my seat. So this book gives me another way of being able to finally say everything I wanted to say that wasn't given the opportunity to.
Yeah, so even though it was necessary, the legal process didn't really provide a sense of accountability, but it more so just created another layer of trauma.
Yes, exactly. The other thing too is the 12 years was the civil trial, and that was the first time that I had seen John's turnout gear. It was in evidence for 12 years, like packed up.
Wow.
So I had not physically seen how horrible. And then it was explained at the civil trial that the color of the coat, being that it was brown, basically the fibers went to vapor, meaning that John was on fire. And that John had a helmet that was leather, like the old ones, and that was melted. Like the whole back was like melted. Those were like new pieces, like to my trauma story, to like physically see what he was wearing. What's tough about sitting in the courtroom is that you end up being a little bit jealous of the survivors. Well, not little, a lot. Not even because obviously I don't want to see anybody die. Happy that they survived, but they got to tell their story, and they continue to tell their story, and they travel, and they go to places, and they tell their story about Black Sunday. And that's sort of tough for me because like John's sacrifices, I'm certain that they mention John's name, but it still feels like something out there that is painful, so that I guess this book kind of helps me to do my little talking point of what I would say and what I want to talk about, because obviously they're not talking about raising 4 kids, but they're talking about the fire and procedures and all that, which is very important. And I appreciate that. But there's a whole aspect behind what happened.
This is a very important piece of it that was missing.
Yeah.
For chiefs, company officers, union leaders, and firefighters that listen, what should they do in the first hours after a catastrophic injury or line of duty death to better care for the family?
Obviously, let them know, because that didn't happen for me. It should be immediate. There should be a shutdown of all social media. There should be somebody coming directly to the house to bring them as quick as they could. In my case, John jumped at 8:30 and I got there at 1:00. Well, I probably got there more, like 12 o'clock. I was with him for an hour before he passed. But if not for me reaching out to somebody, I could have missed John's death. And that would be a very possibly different trauma journey for me, to have not actually seen him and talked to him and see what road he was going down and be accepting of him leaving. So that's so important. And don't think that you are protecting. Give them the power. So when we got to the hospital, they had warned me that John would be intubated, and I was perfectly fine with it. Like, maybe they don't want to handle it that way, and which is completely fine. But to assume what each person wants is completely wrong. It's completely wrong. And keep it consistent, because different firehouses, it needs to be very consistent. So in John's case, John worked at a firehouse. The other people that were involved worked in a rescue. And theirs was handled differently than the firehouse. And again, if you want to call it competition, call it competition, but I can be very competitive. And if I feel like I didn't get all that I deserved, I will let you know it. So keep it consistent. Don't let one group find out in a different way than another group, and do it as quickly as possible and shut down all social media.
You touched on a memorial. Memorials can be both beautiful and painful. So how has your relationship with the annual mass and firehouse memorials changed over time? How do you see them now?
So in the beginning, they definitely suit me. They definitely fit me. I felt connected to the firehouse. The first year is a plaque dedication at the FDNY. So it's not a memorial mass, but it's a plaque dedication. I struggled with that. Again, by that time, I really felt like He wasn't just a fireman. Like, he wasn't just a fireman. The other part of John's like legacy kept being attached to a rope. And that was driving me crazy. His whole life is not about a piece of rope. Why are we talking about a piece of rope? He was this, he was that, not just about a rope. Like, people are very easy to package you into one thing. So that part annoyed me. So I said that in the plaque dedication, I'm like, I'm not going if we're not going to talk about John as a person. They weren't too happy with that, but I was like, I made them discuss him as a person. So that is something, if I was to talk to all chiefs and all whatever, you know, that person as a firefighter, their family whom you want to attend these plaque dedications know them as so much more. So stop ignoring that part of them. Acknowledge all aspects of them as a total person, because that's who we all are as a total person. It also brings much more levity and to it. The other part of it too is to keep in mind that when you have these, this is what would happen to me. So now Kieran was 1, Kat was 3, Jack was 4, Brielle was 7. Still very, very young. I spent the year protecting them. They sit next to me at this plaque dedication, and a dignitary comes up and blurts out all these horrific things that happen in Black Sunday. And I'm like, what are you doing? And I'm like, hoping that my kids are not paying attention. I'm like, you're just undid a whole year's worth of me protecting them. So I'm like, what are we doing? You know, like, did we really need to be here, like, for this? Or if you're going to have a speech like that, how about tell me, I'll leave the kids at home. But they don't want you to leave the kids at home because they want the picture of the kids.
Or maybe you can run it by you. They could consult with you and say, this is what we're looking to do. How do you feel about it?
Right. Which I probably would have been like, scratch all that, you know?
Fair enough, yes. But out of respect for you and John, maybe that's the most respectful, honoring thing you can do.
Right. And Kurt and his kids, because they were there too. I knew what to expect after every year, and I did go, but it became more and more difficult for me to go, mainly because I didn't really have control over have any control over the memorial mass. One, for a couple of different reasons. It's not just me. There was 5 other people involved. And yes, 2 died. Well, actually ended up being Joey dies a couple of years later from his injuries. But so 3 ultimately died. But it's not like I can say, you know what, let's scratch this memorial mass. I'm done with it, because it's not about me. There's other people that are involved. So it's going to continue to go on. But then you sit there and you're like, okay, there are people attending this mass that are survivors. And that's a different feeling than the people who are attending it with a loss. So you watch these survivors being like, you look great. Everybody coming up to them, doing excellent. Look at you. Da, 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 da. And I'm sitting there like, I'm not doing great. That's when I made the decision. And I really, really struggled, because I'm like, oh, if I don't go, then that's showing that I'm not respecting John. But I quickly my kids didn't want to go. They felt awkward. But
you felt obligated.
I felt obligated.
Right.
I felt very obligated. Then when I chose not to go, so now you hate feeling obligated, then you just replace it with guilt because I didn't go.
So how is this helping?
Right. None of it. The only thing that we as a family always do something on January 23rd to celebrate John. And obviously on his birthday, and we're always talking about their dad and stuff. So that's what helps. And if I put the other stuff out of my head, but there's Irish Catholic guilt in every single minute of my day. So I don't know if I'm ever getting rid of that. I'd like to, but I don't think that my kids, again, the only time my kids would go is if they were protecting me, because they didn't want me to be the only one to go. So they would sacrifice hating to go with me to help me. And that was when I was like, this is done.
Yeah. You write about still having a relationship with John while also building a life with Kevin. So that's something many people misunderstand. So how can love expand after loss without replacing anybody?
I think in the beginning, I lost my dad. I didn't realize that my dad was probably sending me many signs to tell me that he was still, because I was 16, not really aware. John made it very blatant that he was still with us. Like, he sent us so many signs, really crazy signs, just to like make sure I got the point that he was still there. Part of my anxiety that helps is when I hand over some of it to John. So with the kids, I can't be with them 24 hours a day. Well, none of them want me to be around now. They're older, want me to be around that long. But I hand a lot over to him. That helps. That helps with it. And he has proven to show me that he is there. When I started to date again, I had absolutely no intention of ever getting married again. But I also didn't want to be lonely the rest of my life either. I thought, find somebody to hang out with or whatever. But then when I found Kevin, I really felt as if John sent Kevin. I talk about, for some reason, people love to ask you if after your trauma, if you found love again. And I always hesitate to say yes. And it has absolutely nothing to do with Kevin. It just feels like if I say yes, then they tilt their head and they go, oh, that's great. And then they have dismissed the rest of your story because you're done. Because for some reason, when you find a man or a woman, that apparently resolves all feeling of grief and sadness in some people's world. So I do hesitate when I say it, and I even hesitate still to this day to say that I'm married, because I don't want you to forget John. Because if I tell you that I'm happily married, which I am, thank God, I still love John. And I still talk to him every day, and I still plan to see him again in heaven. And he gets me through a lot of this crazy world. So that's where I struggle. I really struggle. I struggled, and I feel like maybe in this book, if someone's struggling with that, they can see that you can have two relationships. I still have a relationship with my husband, my first husband, and I have a relationship with my second husband, and they don't cross. My husband's fabulous in recognizing John as part of our marriage, and I recognize Liz as part of our marriage too.
That's a very powerful point about Kevin understanding grief and making it possible for you to trust love again.
Yes, definitely. He gets it, obviously, because he lost his wife. I knew from the beginning. I put it out straight. Like, if you're interested, there is another person in this relationship. And he never once hesitated.
That's amazing. So you continue his legacy through the John Bellew Memorial Fund. What does legacy mean to you now?
I think it's taken a life of its own as I watch the kids grow. They are his legacy. They have turned into these unbelievable adults that they're doing a much better job than myself in moving along his legacy. Not only just their looks, because my one son looks so much like him, but I also laugh because he also walks like him and never saw him. So genetically, all of that is all predetermined. He never saw John walk, but somehow he walks exactly like him. He ignores me like John did a lot of times, the same look, where you think that they're paying attention to you, but they're not paying attention to you. That's the exact look I would get when, so that's genetic. Their humor is very similar. So I love the fact that, of course, I love that. Makes me the happiest to know that John's legacy has gone on without John being here, because genetically speaking, there's 4 people that have his looks, his body type, his humor, his good heart, his desire to want to help people. Like they are him. So I think they're going to be the bigger legacy. Of course, we did golf outings and 5K runs, and we created a scholarship, and those are all, I think we have done. God, I'd love to know how many, because now it is 21 years and we have given away maybe 60 scholarships, more than that, maybe even more than that. So all of those kids have been able to go to college with the help of John. And then Katreana's film, hopefully someday, will be out there, and that not only will teach people about the very important idea of the rope system, but the sacrifice that firemen give and the PTSD that fire families go through. It is an extremely important film for fire people, for the world to see. And I hope someday that it will be made instead of, it's just a legitimately amazing screenplay that needs to be seen. There's so much out there now, and I just think the world needs to see this. Hopefully that will really solidify John's legacy.
What does she need help with to help make that happen? Does she need connections?
She has been working on investments. In order for it to be a legit, it's expensive just because of the fire and whatever. She has won so many screenwriting awards for it, but it's very difficult in today's day and age, just because the film world is not easy, and it's not always so easy for a particular genre.
The best films don't always get made.
Thank you. I was just going to say that, or the time and place. There's different ones that are being more produced than, say. So she continues to fight for her father to get this made. And that would be the ultimate legacy. Besides, the book gives you insight into her movie, and part of my journey is in her movie. So if you enjoyed my book, then you would enjoy her movie. And anybody's out there that would like to help Katreana Bellew, please let me know. She hasn't given up, though. She's a trooper.
She has tenacity like you.
Yeah. Thank you.
After everything, when you say rise from the ashes, what does that mean to you? Not just as a slogan, but as an actual lived reality.
Originally, when I wrote Rise from the Ashes, I thought of the first day I got up from bed. Because for a very long time, my first thought is John's at the firehouse. Like you wake up and then immediately think, oh, John's on a 24. And then you roll over and at the time I saw a baby monitor, you see the lights, and you're a parent. When you first see the baby monitor, you're praying that the next parent gets up when they first see the lights to go and pick up the baby. And I rolled over and saw the lights, and I realized I'm the only person ever going to get that baby monitor from now on. And I didn't want to get up. I wanted to roll over. I wanted to go back. And, I started crying. And I had to rise. Like, I had to stand up that day. And then I stood up every day after that. And there was most of those days I didn't want to do it. So when I say rise, it's just choosing to get up out of bed and do what you were meant to do on this planet, which is to raise John Bellew's kids to the best of my ability.
Well, it sounds like you're doing an amazing job.
I hope so.
How can people find the book, connect with you? How can they help support?
The book can be found anywhere that you buy your books. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can ask bookstores for it. There's a link in eileenbellew.com, which is EILEENBELLEW.com. So there's a link right there. Also within that link is my website, but then there's also within my website a link to Katreana's website. So you could contact Katreana through that.
Thank you so much for reaching out. This, honestly, it was a true honor and a privilege to be able to do this with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me and listening to me. I know I was just going on and on, but I appreciate listening. I hope everyone gets something out of the book or discovers something that they might not have known about grief.